My name is Ethan. I'm 27 years old, and what I'm about to share with you isn't just a story, it's a wound that's finally starting to heal. You might think you know what family drama looks like, especially when it involves inheritance, but I promise you, this was different. This wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal so deep it carved a chasm where my trust used to be, all orchestrated by the very person who shared my blood, my brother, Mark. I still remember the oppressive silence that fell over the house after Grandpa passed. The air, usually thick with the scent of his pipe tobacco and old books, felt thin and empty. It was late spring, the dogwood outside his study window blooming like a final, vibrant burst of life, mocking the stillness within. We were all there, gathered in the living room, my mother, my aunt, and Mark. He was 30 then, always the charming older brother, quick with a joke, quicker with a handshake. He had that knack for making people feel comfortable, disarming them before they even knew it. "This is hard," Mark said, his voice a low rumble, clearing his throat dramatically as he settled into Grandpa's worn armchair. "Grandpa was everything to us. He deserves to have his wishes honored, to the letter." His eyes, however, seemed to glide over us, assessing, calculating, never quite meeting mine. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat, still wrestling with the raw grief of losing the man who had been a true north for our scattered family. I overheard whispers, initially subtle, about the estate. Grandpa wasn't a millionaire, but he owned a considerable chunk of land, a small but historic farmstead that had been in our family for generations, plus a comfortable portfolio. My mother always said he was shrewd, but fair. "Ethan, your grandpa believed in hard work and fairness," she'd often repeat, a mantra of his wisdom. The thought of anyone trying to exploit his legacy felt like a sacrilege, a direct insult to his memory. A few days later, Mark approached me while I was helping clear out some of Grandpa's study, sorting through his old fishing lures and a lifetime of collected maps. "Ethan," he began, his voice surprisingly firm, "I've been thinking about the farm. It's a lot to manage, and with my business, I'm really the only one with the resources to keep it going. It makes sense, doesn't it?" My hand instinctively tightened around a faded photograph of Grandpa and me, fishing by the creek. "What do you mean, Mark?" I asked, a chill creeping up my spine despite the warm afternoon light streaming through the window. He leaned against the cluttered bookshelf, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "I mean, it's pretty clear who Grandpa intended to take over the main assets. He always saw me as the successor, the one with the head for business." It was an outright lie, or at least a gross exaggeration. Grandpa had always been fiercely egalitarian, stressing that everything he had was for us, for both of us. "Did he say that?" I challenged, my voice barely a whisper, afraid of the answer, afraid of the implications. He just chuckled, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "Come on, little brother. You know how Grandpa was. He implied it all the time. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of." The words hung in the air, loaded with a patronizing tone that felt like a slap. My heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. This wasn't the Mark I thought I knew. This was something darker, something greedy, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to strike. And what he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly have known, was the one tiny, crucial detail that would unravel his entire scheme. It's funny how a single moment can redefine a lifetime. Standing there, the air thick with unspoken accusations, my mind drifted back to Grandpa Elias's sun-drenched living room. He often declared, "Family is the only true wealth, boy, more than any land, more than any gold." Mark and I, inseparable then, would just nod. Mark, 3 years my elder, was the charming one. I was the quiet observer. Grandpa always had different advice. You listen close, my boy," he'd tell me, ruffling my hair. "Not like your brother, always racing ahead." Mark, quick, would chime in, "Someone's got to clear the path, Grandpa. Can't have us all standing still." Grandpa would chuckle. "True, Mark. But wisdom comes from watching, too. Remember that. We're a team, remember? Always." We were, or so I believed, destined to share everything. As Grandpa's health faded, his words grew urgent. By his bedside, The room heavy with antiseptic, he'd gather us close. "Boys," he'd whisper, voice frail. "When I'm gone, you two stick together. You promise me? No fighting over what I leave behind." Mark, always quick, squeezed his hand. "Of course, Grandpa. We're brothers. We'll take care of each other. And everything you built." I just nodded, a lump in my throat. "Good boys," he'd murmur. "It's important. More important than you know." One hazy afternoon, with Mark briefly out of the room, Grandpa beckoned me closer. His grip on my hand was strong. His eyes, fixed on mine, burned with a fierce clarity. "Listen very carefully," he rasped, barely audible. "The official will... It's not the full story. There's something else. Something only you can know, only you can protect. It's what truly matters. Promise me you'll make sure it's honored, no matter what Mark says." His words, a fragile secret, hung in the silence, a premonition of betrayal. "Liam, you know how Grandpa was," I'd said to him just last week, sitting at the kitchen island, a half-empty mug of coffee growing cold between my hands. He believed in fairness, in doing things by the book, especially when it came to family. Liam had just grunted, not even looking up from his phone, scrolling through what I assumed were stock prices or sports scores. His dismissive attitude was a familiar sting, a low thrumming chord played on a broken string instrument. It was always like this with him, ever since we were kids. I remembered once when we were maybe 10 and 12, we'd found a crumpled $20 bill on the sidewalk outside the old corner store. I'd wanted to split it evenly, or even turn it into the store owner, but Liam had snatched it, stuffing it into his pocket with a triumphant grin. "Finders, keepers, losers, weepers, little sis," he'd chided, his eyes gleaming with that particular brand of self-interest I knew all too well. It wasn't about the money then, not really, but about the principle, about his innate drive to maximize his own gain, no matter the cost to others, even me. That memory, sharp and unbidden, always crept back into my mind when we discussed anything substantial, anything with real stakes. Grandpa's will, a document that felt both sacred and intimidating, was certainly substantial. I cleared my throat, trying to re-engage Liam. "So, about the house and the land, I mean, we both know Grandpa always said it would be for both of us. A shared legacy." I watched him closely, my heart thumping a quiet rhythm against my ribs. He finally looked up, his brows furrowed, a slight sneer on his lips. "Shared legacy? Come on, Maya, let's be realistic. The house is old. The land is good, sure, but it needs work, significant work. You really think you're equipped to handle half of that responsibility, half of the taxes, half of the upkeep?" His words dripped with a patronizing tone, a subtle poison that began to spread through my veins. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, a dismissal of my capabilities. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "Equipped?" I retorted, my voice a little too sharp, a little too defensive. "Liam, I run my own business. I've managed projects twice as complex as maintaining an old farmhouse, and Grandpa taught me everything about that land, remember? The rotational crops, the irrigation system he built. I was out there with him every summer." My hand instinctively went to the cool, smooth surface of the kitchen counter, finding a grounding point. His smile, when it came, was thin, barely reaching his eyes. "Sure, Maya. You picked a few tomatoes. That's hardly running a farm, is it? Look, I've been doing the heavy lifting for Grandpa these past few years, practically managing the whole estate. He relied on me. It's only fair that I take the lead on this." He leaned back, crossing his arms, an air of unshakable certainty about him. It felt like the air in the room was thickening, becoming harder to breathe. "Take the lead?" I echoed, the phrase tasting bitter on my tongue. "Or take it all? What exactly are you suggesting, Liam? Because it sounds a lot like you're trying to cut me out." My voice was quiet now, laced with a tremor that I desperately tried to hide. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But the warmth did nothing to penetrate the chill that was settling over me. The quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed unnaturally loud. He sighed, a dramatic exhalation that was clearly meant to convey my irrationality. "Don't be dramatic, Maya. I'm just saying someone needs to be practical here. We can't both run the place. And frankly, with your artistic endeavors, I just don't see you dedicating the time needed. I'm offering to take the burden, to make sure Grandpa's legacy is preserved properly. His words were smooth, a veneer of concern over something much colder. He was always good at that, at twisting his self-interest into something that sounded like altruism. But I knew better. I always had. The first lawyers' meeting felt less like a formal reading and more like a theatrical performance, with Mark playing the lead. He had arranged everything, from the sleek, polished table to the surprisingly cold temperature of the office. "Ethan, you know how complicated Grandpa could be," he started, leaning forward, an almost sympathetic wrinkle between his brows. "His affairs were extensive. It's going to take a lot of work to sort through everything. Good thing I'm here to handle the heavy lifting, right?" I nodded, watching the way his eyes darted from me to the stern-faced lawyer, Mr. Henderson, whose silence was unnerving. "Of course, Mark. I appreciate you taking the initiative. But what exactly did the will say about the house and the land in Vermont? Grandpa mentioned those specifically." I tried to keep my voice even, but a prickle of unease had begun to trace its way down my spine. The will reading had been surprisingly brief, almost perfunctory, with a lot of legal jargon that Mark had quickly waved away as standard procedure. Mark gave a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Details, details. It's all going to the trust jointly, of course, eventually. But the estate needs to be liquidated first, for taxes and outstanding debts. It's a huge undertaking, Ethan. Trust me, you don't want to be bogged down in this." His tone was smooth, almost patronizing, and it grated on my nerves. "I'm talking to Mr. Henderson about the best way to manage it all. It's a lot of paperwork. Years, probably." "Years?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat but said nothing. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken implications. Grandpa was meticulous. He'd have tied up every loose end. I don't understand why it's so vague, and why I don't have a copy of the full will yet." I looked at Mr. Henderson, hoping for an ally, but his expression remained a carefully neutral mask. He was a professional, after all, paid by the estate, or as I was starting to suspect, by Mark. Mark leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Look, Ethan, it's not vague, it's just legalese. Very complex stuff. I'm handling it. What do you want, a full audit? You can trust your own brother, can't you?" His words hung in the air, laced with a challenge. It wasn't a question of trust, not anymore. It was a question of control, and a dawning, sickening realization. The calm he projected was a calculated deception, and beneath it, I could almost hear the rustle of papers being quietly shuffled, fortunes being subtly redirected. Michael sat back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, oblivious or uncaring of the emotional storm brewing inside me. "Look, Alex, it's simple," he began, leaning forward, his voice a low, condescending rumble that grated on my nerves. Grandpa was old. His mind wasn't what it used to be. He probably rambled, said a lot of things. But legally, what matters is the last will, the one he signed right before, you know. His eyes flickered to the lawyer, a perfectly coiffed woman named Ms. Davies, who nodded sagely, her pen poised over a notepad. It felt like they were in a conspiracy, a silent agreement to erase my very existence from Grandpa's legacy. "Rambled?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper, thick with unspent tears and rising indignation. My hands, clasped tightly under the table, were starting to tremble. "Is that what you call it, Michael? You think Grandpa just rambled when he talked about our family, about his wishes, about us?" The word "us" hung in the air, a silent accusation against his blatant attempt to cut me out completely. The cold air conditioning of the lawyer's office seemed to amplify the chill of his words. He waved a dismissive hand. "He said a lot of things. He loved us both. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about legal documentation. And this will," he tapped the thick document on the table, "is clear. Everything to me as the eldest grandson to ensure the family business continues without complications. His gaze lingered on me, a deliberate slight, suggesting I was the complication. My jaw tightened, a knot of fury coiling in my stomach. This wasn't just about money. It was about stripping away my memories, my connection to Grandpa, painting me as an irrelevant, burdensome footnote. Ms. Davies cleared her throat, her voice smooth and professional. Mr. Thompson, your brother has presented a valid, notarized will. Unless there is evidence of undue influence or a later, equally valid document, this is quite straightforward. She didn't look at me, her focus solely on the legal text in front of her. The weight of her words, the finality they implied, pressed down on me. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, but this time, it was mixed with a steely resolve. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed I had nothing. Complications, Michael? I repeated, my voice now stronger, a quiet tremor replacing the whisper. My eyes locked onto his, challenging him. The room felt suddenly very quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above us. You think I'm the complication? You're right, he said a lot of things. He talked about loyalty, about family, about promises kept. I paused, letting the implication hang, watching his smirk falter, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The scent of old paper and leather filled the sterile room, a stark contrast to the vivid, warm memories of Grandpa's study that flashed through my mind. He leaned back again, a forced casualness in his posture, but his eyes narrowed. What are you getting at, Alex? What promises? He scoffed, looking at Ms. Davies as if for support. He made promises to everyone. He was a sentimental old man. My gaze didn't waver. He was more than that, Michael. He was a man of his word. And he knew you. He knew what you were capable of. The air in the room seemed to thicken, a palpable tension replacing the earlier dismissive calm. It was a shift, a subtle crack in Michael's carefully constructed facade of control. Are you suggesting something nefarious, Mr. Thompson? Ms. Davies interjected, finally turning her full attention to me, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. The moment had arrived. The card was in my hand, heavy with the weight of Grandpa's last wishes and my own simmering anger. I'm not suggesting anything, Ms. Davies, I replied, my voice now steady, imbued with a quiet power that surprised even myself. I'm stating a fact. Grandpa had his own way of ensuring his final wishes were honored, even if they weren't written down in a formal document. A muscle twitched in Michael's jaw. He knew. The lawyer's letter, declaring Liam the sole beneficiary, felt like a physical blow. My desperate call to him was met with cold laughter. Anna, it's done, he'd hissed. You have no claim. The line went dead, leaving me in a suffocating silence. His legal team was relentless. I felt utterly crushed. My apartment, usually a refuge, now felt like a cage. Dusk seeped in, painting defeat across the room. I paced, a frantic rhythm of what-ifs consuming me. My gaze fell on Grandpa's old wooden memory box on his armchair. I reached for it, fingers tracing the worn patterns, desperate for a connection, for anything to soothe the gnawing emptiness. Inside, nestled among tarnished trinkets, lay his voice recorder. A sharp jolt, a sudden flash of memory. Grandpa's habit, his endless dictations, his important thoughts for posterity. Never know when a good story will come in handy, Anna, he'd always chuckled, that familiar twinkle in his eye. My breath caught. Could he have recorded his final wishes? A fragile spark ignited in the desolation. Trembling, I lifted the aged device. It felt impossibly heavy, charged with forgotten power. I pressed play, my heart hammering. A faint hiss, then his unmistakable gravelly voice filled the room. He spoke of the farm, his legacy, and then, so distinctly, the inheritance. It must be divided. Every word was clear, undeniable. Liam, in his greed, had forgotten this crucial part of Grandpa's methodical nature. A fierce, defiant warmth spread through me, chasing the chill of defeat. This was it. The undeniable truth. Liam's arrogance had blinded him. He'd overlooked Grandpa's true self, the man who documented everything. "You made a mistake, Liam," I whispered, my voice hardening. "A monumental mistake." Grandpa's voice continued, a calming, empowering presence. It wasn't just a recording, it was his final declaration. My path, once shrouded in shadows, now shone brilliantly clear. I would honor him. I would fight. His own words would ensure true justice prevailed. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "As per the will presented by Mr. David Miller," he began, voice dry. "The entirety of the estate, including property and all financial assets, is bequeathed solely to him, David Miller." My breath hitched. Caregiver? David had visited Grandpa maybe 5 times last year, always a quick hello before gambling. Rage, cold and sharp, began to prickle beneath my skin. David leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He caught my eye, malice glinting. "You heard him, Sarah. Grandpa knew who truly cared. It's all mine." His voice, a low, taunting whisper, was barely audible over the air conditioning's hum. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the armrests. Injustice was a physical weight, pressing down, stealing air from my lungs. "Cared for him?" I finally croaked, voice foreign. "You barely showed up. You pawned his watch last Christmas, David. Don't you dare pretend you were anything more than a leech." My voice rose, cutting through the sterile quiet. Mr. Henderson shifted, gaze flickering. David's smirk hardened into a sneer. "Watch your tone, little sister," he hissed, eyes narrowing. "This isn't about sentiment. This is about legitimate legal proceedings. Grandpa made his wishes clear." He gestured towards the stack of papers, dismissing me. It was sickening. He truly believed he had won, that his flimsy, fabricated narrative was impenetrable. "His wishes were clear, all right," I retorted, standing abruptly. The chair scraped loudly, echoing. "Clear to anyone who bothered to listen. Unlike you, I did listen to Grandpa. Very carefully, every single day, right up until the end." My gaze bore into him. David scoffed, crossing his arms. "Oh, really? And what exactly did our dear grandfather whisper? More fairy tale nonsense?" "Not nonsense, David. Truth. And I have proof," I said, my voice gaining strength, resolve settling. My hand went to my purse, where my phone lay heavy, a digital guardian of the real legacy. The air in the room thickened, palpable tension coiling between us. David's smug expression wavered, a flicker of doubt before he masked it. Mr. Henderson looked up, his mild interest piqued. "Proof of what, Ms. Miller?" he inquired, voice a quiet prompt. The stage was set. "I've reviewed all the paperwork, Ms. Davies, Mr. Davies," Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, a faint sigh escaping his lips. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, clearly feeling the weight of the division in the room. "As per the last official will, dated 5 years ago, the estate is bequeathed primarily to Mark, with a smaller annuity designated for Mia's living expenses and a trust for any future children she might have." He paused, looking from my brother to me, his gaze lingering on my face, probably seeing the defeat etched there. Mark leaned back, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He even winked at me, a condescending gesture that ignited a silent fury within me. "There you have it, Mia. No more arguments, no more emotional pleas. It's all in black and white, just as Grandpa intended." His words were laced with a cold finality, echoing off the high ceilings of the study. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken accusations and the bitterness of a fractured family. I felt my hands clench under the table, my nails digging into my palms, a desperate anchor to reality. "Intended?" I finally spoke, my voice a low rumble, barely audible over the hum of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "You honestly think Grandpa intended for me to be an afterthought, Mark? After everything we shared? After all his promises?" My question hung in the air, a challenge he was ready to dismiss. My eyes met his, searching for any flicker of the brother I once knew, but finding only a hardened, calculating gaze. "Promises, Mia, are not legally binding," he scoffed, pushing a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "The will is. It's simple, really. Some people just refuse to accept reality when it doesn't suit their grand delusions." He turned to Mr. Henderson, offering a tight, professional smile. "I believe that concludes our business, then. I'll make arrangements for the transfer of assets as soon as possible." He was already moving on, already planning his next steps, completely convinced of his absolute victory. The audacity of his presumption was breathtaking. "No, it doesn't conclude our business," I asserted, my voice gaining strength, resonating with a conviction that even surprised me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impending confrontation. "There's something you've forgotten, Mark. Something you dismissed as sentimental nonsense, but which holds more truth than any document you've manipulated." His expression shifted, a flicker of irritation, then annoyance, but no real concern. He still thought I was bluffing, still believed he had won. "Oh, here we go," Mark sighed dramatically, rolling his eyes as if I were a tiresome child. "More of your dramatics, Mia. We've been over this. Grandpa was old. He rambled. Whatever you think you heard, it doesn't change a thing. The law is the law." He gestured dismissively at the lawyer, as if inviting Mr. Henderson to confirm his statement to shut me down entirely. But Mr. Henderson remained silent, his gaze now fixed solely on me, a curious anticipation in his eyes. "It's not rambling, Mark. It's his last will. His real last will," I stated, my gaze unwavering, holding his, forcing him to meet my accusation head-on. The words felt like a declaration of war, a line drawn in the sand. "And it's not just something I think," I heard. "It's something I have." The blood drained from his face, the smug smile replaced by a look of dawning horror. For the first time, a genuine flicker of fear crossed his eyes, a recognition of something he hadn't accounted for, a truth he had desperately tried to bury. The silence that followed in the lawyer's office was far heavier than any shouting match. It settled around us like a shroud, muffling the triumphant drumbeat in my own chest. Mark, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and rage, had been escorted out by his own bewildered attorney, the air still thick with his broken promises and our shattered past. I was left alone with Mr. Henderson, the elder statesman of the legal world, who simply steepled his fingers, his gaze profound, almost mournful. He didn't need to say anything. The weight of what had transpired, the irrevocable split within a family, hung palpably. "He really believed he could get away with it," I murmured, my voice raspy, a stranger's sound. The victory felt hollow, tinged with a bitterness that surprised me. I had prepared for elation, for the sweet taste of vindication, but all I tasted was ash. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping him. "People often underestimate the ties that bind, and the evidence that surfaces when they fray. Your grandfather, he was a wise man." He looked at me then, truly looked, past the legalities and the documents. "This isn't just about the inheritance anymore, is it, Clara?" His words, gentle and perceptive, were a balm and a sting simultaneously. "No," I admitted, the truth catching in my throat. "It never was, not really. It was about trust, about family, about remembering who we were before money poisoned everything." The room, once a battleground, now felt like a mausoleum for a relationship that had died a slow, agonizing death. I could still hear Grandpa's voice, clear and strong from the recording, his wisdom echoing in the empty space Mark had left. Later that evening, the city lights blurred outside my window, each one a tiny, distant wound. My phone vibrated with a text from Aunt Sarah, simple and heartfelt. "We're here for you, sweetie, always." It was a lifeline, a reminder that not everything was lost, that some bonds endured, forged in a different kind of fire. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Mark. I pictured him, alone somewhere, grappling with the unraveling of his carefully constructed lie. Did he feel the weight of what he'd done, or only the sting of being caught? A knock on my apartment door startled me. It was my mother, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. She hugged me tight, a silent testament to solidarity. "He called," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mark, he said he never wanted to see us again." The words hung in the air, final and heavy, sealing the chasm between us. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I might have imagined, but a quiet, chilling severance, a fading presence from our lives. The silence in the grand old house was heavier now than it had ever been. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of Grandpa's presence, but a vast, echoing emptiness that swallowed even my own thoughts. The legal proceedings were a blur of paperwork and hushed conversations, culminating in a verdict that, on paper, was a victory. Yet, looking out at the sprawling, familiar fields, the wind felt hollow, tainted by the wreckage left behind. My brother, Mark, had retreated into a furious, self-imposed exile, leaving behind not just the legal battle, but a chasm between us that seemed impossible to bridge. "Is this what winning feels like?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice a frail breath against the vastness. I picked up a small, weathered wooden bird Grandpa had carved years ago, its smooth surface cool beneath my fingertips. He had always said, "Sometimes, Alex, the greatest victories are the ones you wish you never had to fight." His words echoed now, not as a comfort, but as a prophecy fulfilled. The house was mine, technically, but the warmth, the laughter, the unspoken bond that had once filled these walls had dissipated like smoke. A lawyer, Ms. Albright, had called earlier, her professional tone barely masking a hint of satisfaction. "It's done, Alex. The court ruled decisively in your favor. Your grandfather's wishes are upheld, thanks to that recording. It was irrefutable." "Irrefutable," I repeated, a bitter taste in my mouth. "But what about irretrievable? What about the family that's irretrievably broken?" She paused, a small cough on the line. "Family disputes over inheritance are rarely neat, Mr. Thorne. You did what you had to do to honor your grandfather. That's a noble act." "Noble?" I scoffed, turning from the window to pace the worn Persian rug in the living room. "I exposed my brother's greed to the world. I tore apart what little family we had left. Is that noble or just necessary?" The phone line remained silent for a long moment, the deep silence of a professional who had no answers for emotional wreckage. After a beat, Ms. Albright offered, "Perhaps in time healing can begin. It often does." Her words felt like empty platitudes, distant and cold. We ended the call, and once again, the house swallowed the sound, leaving me with the persistent hum of the refrigerator and the quiet creak of the old floorboards under my weight. The air smelled of dust and old wood, and a faint, lingering scent of Grandpa's pipe tobacco from years gone by. I ran my hand over the rough-hewn mantel, remembering his calloused fingers tracing the same patterns. The house felt like a museum of what once was, rather than a home that lived and breathed. My gaze fell upon the antique radio in the corner, the very one I'd used to record his voice, now just a silent wooden sentinel. It felt like a monument to a moment I could never truly escape. The courtroom's sterile air still clung to my clothes, a phantom scent of polished wood and stale ambition, even days later. There was a quietness in my apartment now, a void where the frenetic energy of legal battles and whispered anxieties used to reside. I remember staring at the empty space where my brother's name had once been taped onto our shared mailbox, now just a faded patch of glue. It wasn't triumph I felt, not really. More like the stillness after a storm, when the air is clean, but the damage is undeniably etched into the landscape. The victory felt hollow, a heavy truth bought at the price of a future I once naively imagined. My phone rang, startling me. It was our lawyer, Mr. Henderson. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "Everything's finalized, you know. The funds are where they should be according to your grandfather's will. All settled." He paused, a gentle sigh on his end. "Are you all right, really?" I could hear the concern, the recognition that sometimes winning feels like losing something equally vital. "I don't know, Mr. Henderson," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "It's just, quiet now. Too quiet. He hummed in understanding. Yes, that's often the case. It takes time for the echoes to fade. I spent a lot of time walking in those weeks, my feet crunching on autumn leaves, the crisp air a balm to my raw nerves. I'd walk past the old park where Grandpa used to take us, the swings still creaking faintly in the breeze. Each creak was a tiny ghost of laughter. It was there, beneath the ancient oak, that I truly began to understand the weight of Grandpa's final words, not just as evidence, but as a testament to his character. He hadn't just disinherited my brother. He had sought to guide me, to protect something more fragile than money. He had seen the fault lines long before they became canyons. One afternoon, a small package arrived from Mr. Henderson's office. Inside was a single leather-bound journal. It was Grandpa's, filled with his spidery handwriting. A note from Mr. Henderson explained it was found amongst the estate papers, marked specifically for me. My fingers traced the worn cover. Flipping through the pages, I found sketches of the family, old poems, and near the end, a series of entries that spoke of his worries about my brother and his profound hope for me. The true inheritance, one entry read, is not what you receive, but who you become. Reading those words, a profound sense of melancholy washed over me. It was a gentle sadness, not sharp like grief, but deep, like the quiet hum of the earth. He knew. He had always known. The recorded words were a desperate measure, a last attempt to shield me from the very outcome that had just unfolded. The battle had been won, the truth revealed, but the cost was a lingering sorrow, a permanent fissure in the family tapestry. My brother was gone from my life, and with him, a part of my own history, fractured beyond repair. The silence in the house was no longer just the absence of noise, it was the echo of a lost brother, a memory that would forever live in the quiet corners of my mind. The dust settled, not just in the old, sunlit rooms of Grandpa's house, but within the fractured corners of my own heart. Winning didn't feel like victory. It was a quiet, almost mournful resolution. The legal documents, signed and sealed, now sat in a safe deposit box, stark reminders of a battle I never wanted to fight. The silence in the house, once filled with Grandpa's gentle hums and the rustle of his newspaper, felt different now, heavier, imbued with an absence that was more profound than before. I found myself lingering in his study, tracing the spines of his worn books, the scent of aged paper and pipe tobacco still faintly clinging to the air. "You know, he'd be proud," Mom said one afternoon, her voice soft as she stood in the doorway watching me. She was holding a photo album, its cover faded velvet. Not of the fight, mind you, but of you, standing up for what was right, for his wishes. I turned, a weak smile touching my lips. I miss him. This whole thing, it feels like it just magnified how much he's truly gone. The words hung between us, an unarticulated ache. "And Mark?" Mom sighed, a deep, tired sound. "He still calls sometimes, but it's strained, like talking across a canyon. He couldn't let go of the anger, even though it was all his doing." Her gaze drifted to the window, lost in thought. Some things, once broken, don't mend back the same way. My brother Mark became a ghost in our lives. Our parents tried, bridging the chasm with cautious phone calls and strained holiday visits, but the warmth, the shared laughter, had evaporated. His presence, when it did surface, was thin, like mist on a cold morning, quickly dissipating. The texts grew less frequent, then stopped entirely. The inheritance, once a symbol of Grandpa's boundless love, had become the stark line dividing us, a permanent scar on the family tapestry. I walked through Grandpa's garden, the morning dew still clinging to the rose petals, their scent a soft whisper against my skin. The old wooden bench where he used to sit, telling me stories of his youth, now stood empty. I reached out, tracing the weathered grain of the wood. His final words, etched into that recording, echoed not just in my mind, but in the very foundation of this home, a testament to his foresight, his enduring fairness. He had known, somehow, the complexities that lay hidden beneath the surface of family. The sun climbed higher, casting long golden shafts through the leaves, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, hopeful stars. The true inheritance, I realized, wasn't confined to bank accounts or property deeds. It was the quiet wisdom he'd imparted, the values he'd instilled, the love that, despite everything, still pulsed within these walls. It was the understanding that some bonds are tested, some are broken, and some endure, even if redefined. The whisper of his memory, profound and gentle, was the most precious legacy of all, guiding me through the quiet, evolving landscape of my life, a silent, enduring presence in the vast, open future.